Hey, what's up? Hello, everyone. Welcome into Fantasy Filmball, the show where we turn movies into sports and sports into something we don't talk about here. My name is Matt.
My name is Dyl, and join us for our 2024 Best Picture Revisiting series, where we will return to all 10 nominees, talk about their nominations, their snubs, and our overall thoughts of the films. And as always, we're going to be welcoming in a guest today, and I'm super pumped for this episode because we're revisiting one of my least favorite nominees, and it's gone up a lot, but the most important part is I want to know who abandoned my man Snoopy in the vestibule. I mentioned we have a guest here. Akshat, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. I'm kind of interested to talk about this movie because my opinions of, I mean, even before I watched it a second time, like I was always like interested in talking about it, but like I've seen like a recent shift in my opinion that like makes it fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was really, I mean, we brought you on this show. Like initially, our idea was we wanted someone who could kind of talk down on Maestro, and so we were like, okay, who do we know that isn't a Maestro fan? And you were one of the names that came up. And then yesterday when you messaged and you were like, hey, I like Maestro now, I rewatched it. I was like, oh man, I'm glad because I love Maestro, but it was really funny to see your opinion change on it. It's great. So I'd love to hear, what is it that like changed for you from a first watch, what didn't click, to now feeling like, you know, you're on the movie's wavelength?
So the thing is, like, I don't think I misunderstood like what the approach was. Like when I first saw it, like I saw it at New York, like the film festival, when it was probably at its height, like in terms of like discourse and stuff. Even if it like never reached like popular levels or something. Mm-hmm. But I mean, I did know that like Cooper insisted that he didn't want to make a traditional biopic, but like was trying to like focus on the relationship. But when I watched it the first time, I didn't like I couldn't pinpoint at the time what like I had like specific issues with, but like I just like felt a sense of like being underwhelmed, and like I there were a lot of like things that I couldn't connect the dots to and stuff, and like I when it initially came out, I was like, okay, it's good, it has good performances, I like some part of it, and then it like aged a little like sour in my mind, and I was like, do I really like this? And like over the course of the year, I kind of like shat talk it on the Discord. Like,
I need to.
I like said like, oh, this is definitely not getting screenplay. Who's gonna nominate for that? And I was like so adamant until BAFTA happened, and like even when the Oscar nominations, you know, happened, I was like, okay, fine. If we had to have an underwhelming movie, this will be it. That's okay. And then so I sat down yesterday to watch it. Just be like, okay, I need to do like go deeper into this, like understand why I didn't like it as much. And then I sat, and then the first 30 minutes goes, and I'm like, okay, I'm enjoying this. Okay, that's weird. All right, maybe it'll start to get slower. Then 30 minutes go again, and I get interrupted by like a call, and then I'm like, shit, why did I get interrupted? And then I think again, I'm like, wait, I feel this for getting interrupted for Maestro of all movies. What's happening? And then like it kind of dawned on me that like a lot of the connective tissue that I thought was missing when I watched the first time, like I caught like subtle things, and like, you know, like I think the screenplay, especially like the structure of it, I understood what it was going for a lot better this time.
So Dylan, I know you also had a bit of a shift in opinion, maybe not as big a shift in opinion as Akshat, but you definitely liked it more on a second watch. So what was the film like for you the first time you saw it, and what changed?
Yeah, so my first time seeing was also at a film festival, this time in Virginia. It was the opening night film, and I have to say, we talked about it here on the channel. It was one of my most anticipated films for the festival. I was dying to get into the room for that. It's the only film I didn't get tickets ahead of time, so I'm like, oh, standby line, here we come. I gotta see Bradley Cooper's newest film because I love A Star Is Born. And I have to say, I'm a sucker for conductor films. Sorry, Tar, you are the exception. But this first viewing of Maestro, I was left very underwhelmed. I thought the screenplay was a complete mess. The film was filled of tonal errors, and I walked away just thinking Bradley Cooper was really good. That orchestra scene is amazing, but I just felt very disconnected from the movie. And here around for this Best Picture Revisiting series, I went in with an open mind. I've been tend to know to like movies that other people don't like. And I'm like, why don't I like Maestro? Everyone else hates Maestro. Why am I also on the hate train? And this time around, I did like it more. I didn't love it, but a lot of my issues were fixed in terms of the plot. I still think this is a technical marvel. It has one of my favorite cinematography of like any film this year. Even before I came around to it, I still thought the cinematography was a highlight here. The costumes, I think, are very impressive. I personally wouldn't nominate them, but Felicia has so many beautiful dresses, and I even really like a lot of Leonard Bernstein's fits. It could be a sweater, it could be a suit, it could just be like an unbuttoned t-shirt. It just rocks. It works for me. And yeah, I still have issues with Maestro. We'll talk about them throughout today, but I did like this one a fair bit more. I went from a solid 6, like I talked about in the Midnight Critics review, up to like a light 8, and it's out of the gutter of my Best Picture lineup. It's no longer number 10.
Yeah, I also went from like a solid 6 to like, I mean, you said light 8, I'd say like mid to high 8.
Cool.
I love to hear it, because this movie shocked the hell out of me. I went into Maestro expecting not to like it. I did not see it at a film festival. It didn't come to TIFF, but I did see it in theaters at the TIFF Bell Lightbox. And I went in being like, ugh, I guess I have to go see Maestro now.
I should talk too much.
I'd heard so many people talking about it being mid, and I really don't like biopics. Really don't like them. They're so dull for the most part, and you get so used to the formula of like, well, we're going to tell you the story of this person's life exclusively through these major events that would make their Wikipedia bio. And I absolutely loved the I don't give a fuck nature of Bradley Cooper's treatment of Leonard Bernstein. Like, it feels like he's shouting at you through the screen, if you want to read, if you want to learn, read a book. And that's just what it felt like. He turned Leonard Bernstein not into someone to learn about, but into a myth. You know, this is a person who lived a life that is mythologically big, and he treated him in the movie in that exact way. You know, it feels like he's larger than life the entire time. I've made the comparison quite a few times that last year Tar turned a fictional character into someone who you thought this was a real biopic of Lydia Tarr. And this year, Maestro turned a real person into a movie that you could watch it and be like, this is a fictional character, right? Like, this feels like this person doesn't exist. If you didn't know Leonard Bernstein, you aren't going to learn anything about him. And you're going to leave just being like, that was a really interesting, odd dude in a little bit of a weird movie. And I just love that energy of taking this Oscar bait biopic and just flipping it around and totally delivering something unexpected. And I think that's honestly part of why a lot of people don't like this movie. It's so different from what this type of movie typically delivers. But I crave different. I seek different. And that's really what speaks to me in this movie.
I guess to follow that up, which is really interesting about what you said there at the end of how people weren't expecting this and that's why they didn't like it. When Elvis came out last year, like, I don't want the conventional biopic. I want something different. And then when that different came, they're like, oh no, I want conventional. Bring it back. So it's like, what do people want? Because while I still have issues with the script,
audiences, you know.
Yeah,
I mean, Oscar people are still Oscar people.
Yeah,
it's true.
I guess, like, if you're, like, talking about, like, general audiences, they probably, like, prefer the more stereotypical one. Because, like, I mean, like, Elvis, I mean, it was, like, very flashy, but, like, a lot of it was kind of, like, plot, at point after point in his life. And, like, I mean, the ones that make bank, like, Bob Marley, that one that came recently, and, like, Bohemian Rhapsody are all kind of, like, Wikipedia summaries. So, yeah, if you're, like, going into this, like, expecting, like a standard Bernstein biopic, or, like, learning about his life and, like, how he moved up, like, the music, like, hierarchy or whatever, like, you're not going to get that. It's about two people in a relationship who are suffering for very similar reasons, but approach it, like, sort of differently, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the two polar opposites. I mean, Leonard Bernstein says very early in the film, I want so much, you know, and that's the whole arc of the movie is the loneliness of being someone who always desires more, and also Felicia's choice to stay with someone who always wants more, who's always craving more, knowing that she wants to be with this person but will never be able to fully fill the hole in his heart, which he's going to keep going after and keep going after, and he's never going to be fully satisfied with who he is, with where he is, and that's going to lead to his downfall. We've seen this type of movie done a million times, but we've never seen it so understated, where like scenes just start nowhere and they end nowhere. They just go in circles, and that's so interesting to me, to have these like to make a biopic where it's so aimless the entire time. That's what life is like. And I really appreciated that they didn't do the laundry list of being like, well, now we have to spend 20 minutes talking about West Side Story, and then we have to spend 20 minutes talking about Mahler's Fifth, and then we have to spend 20 minutes talking about this. I love that it didn't do that.
Going further into what you just talked about there, I also agree. I don't like how it just hit on all those beats, but I did not like when it tried to force feeds us some of his musical moments. Like, oh, they casually dropped he's working on West Side Story. We hear a track from the score that just feels very out of context when it does play. So I do agree that I like how they subverted it, but if you're going to mention a little bit, give us a little bit more. To go back to the cathedral scene, I think that's the highlight of this film. We'll talk more about that later once we get into cinematography and sound, but I wish we got a few more moments, maybe not the whole film, maybe like an Elvis. I haven't seen One Love yet, but maybe like what Bob Marley does, where it's concert after concert. I would have liked to just see an additional one, so it wasn't just one, to get another moment, but maybe that would subtract from just how beautiful, how grand that one that we do get is. But we talked about Best Picture, our general thoughts. This film is not going to win the Oscar. It did get a fair share of nominations, but one that most people were predicting all year for it to win. It doesn't look like it's going to win anymore, but it secured that nomination for Bradley Cooper and lead actor. And I guess just to kick off the discussion here, I think he's really, really good in this role. Obviously, he's gunning for the Oscar. Who wouldn't it be if they were in the same position? He's not one of my favorites of the year, but what he's doing here is super impressive. And I know the makeup is not his performance, but just the way he ages throughout the film, the way he changes his voice, the way his mannerisms change in each decade that we see him, I think is very, very great work from him. Obviously, there's some moments from the screenplay that kind of do bring his performance down for me just a little bit, but when he is going all at it, when he's fully committing to Leonard Bernstein, I think he's very much knocking out of the park. And if he was the winner, I know I've said here before, I think it would be a bad win. Taking that back, I would not be mad if Bradley Cooper ended up winning at the end of the day. I think he's really good in this role. I think he's getting way too much hate online. Like, I understand why, because I used to be a hater of this film, but I was never a hater of his like performance, like, oh, he's awful. I just thought like he's trying too hard. But
I mean, like just like the movie, like my opinion has varied on his performance a bit. I never thought it was bad per se. But like I think the thing that held me back was it like the complaint many people had that like it felt like, not that specifically it felt like him chasing the Oscar, because okay, that's fine. Like I don't particularly care about that, but it felt like I was seeing Bradley Cooper play Leonard Bernstein rather than Leonard Bernstein. But like watching it now, like watching it a second time, I kind of appreciate that artificiality a bit, because in a sense, like Bernstein the person was kind of like living two different lives, right? Like if you bring like there's like one moment in the interview where he talks about like being a composer and a conductor, and his performance is kind of like him being both at different points of times, like him being the conductor, like the big performance, you know, the image that he wants to like portray, and him being like the other side of his performance is being the conductor, where he has this like big inner life that like is mostly isolated and kept to himself. So like thinking about that and putting that into context of his performance, it like really made me appreciate it more. I still wouldn't like. I wouldn't like vote for him, but like if he won, I'd be like, well, that's a pretty good win.
You talk about subtlety, and I think that he does do this very well. There's that scene where he's sitting outside with what's her name? Maya Hawke. With Maya Hawke, and they're talking about the rumors going on at school. And I just think the way that he plays that is both what you're talking about, where he has the showy moments where he's putting on the voice, he's doing the mannerisms, but the way he's going about it is like so not showy at the same time, where I just think that scene is like would be the Oscar clip. Like when if they do clips this year, that's what they should show. Obviously they're going to show something where he's going crazy, he's conducting, he's doing something where he has the big smile, probably. But like that scene with Maya Hawke, I think is on this watch was so much more impactful.
I would vote for him. He's my favorite in the category. I'm going to be constantly the one who's like, you guys like it, but I love it.
Good.
The thing with Bradley Cooper, which you just said, Akshat, by saying that, you know, there's this complex inner life to him, the most interesting thing about his performance in Maestro is that it's simultaneously the most unsubtle performance of the year and the most subtle performance of the year, because what he's doing there, Leonard Bernstein is an artificial character. He is putting on this face. He's putting on a performance for everyone in his life. He is like ridiculously outrageous at all times, and that's his persona. That's what he's cultivated. That's what people want to hear from him. That's what they want to see from him. And there are small, subtle moments that we get throughout the film where we start to understand that might not be who he actually is. Maybe he is a little bit more of a tortured artist than he's letting on. And there's small, subtle moments, like after he says, "I'm reining it in," you see, as in the next shot, he's walking through the park and he looks miserable. And there are other moments with him like screaming into a pillow as he's dealing with Felicia's battle with cancer. And there are those moments where you get a sense that there are layers and layers of this performance, that he is playing the man who is playing the man. And that's what I really love about Bradley Cooper here. Yes, he's chasing after the Oscar, but it doesn't feel phony to me in that way. It feels really organic. He is my favorite in the category, but I will say my favorite performance in the movie is still Carey Mulligan. She's amazing, breathtaking, so good.
But yes, Carey Mulligan, I think, is really good in this movie. I do feel kind of similar to how I felt about Divine Joy Randolph in The Holdovers, where she's kind of underutilized. I think the poster and the marketing say, like, oh, she's the lead, it's her story, isn't entirely true. Her presence is felt throughout the film, but there's a few scenes where I definitely feel like she's second fiddle. We don't get enough of what her perspective is or her feelings are in that certain moments, but there are times, like we mentioned before, when she learns that she gets cancer, scenes where she has to put Lenny back in his place because he's being too messy. I think she is very much showing how great of a performer that she is and how great of a role this is, but I think more often than not, she's always playing second fiddle, where I'm like, I see the acclaim, but also I just don't feel like there's enough there for the acclaim.
Yeah. I think I like her being first billing is kind of interesting, because like when you think of Maestro, you kind of think, oh, it's gonna be like about Leonard Bernstein's life, his like secrets, and like some people have described it as like this movie being like the woman behind the man and stuff like that. And the reason I find it interesting is that like when you're watching it and like you're kind of thinking a lot about like what Bernstein's going through, like the double nature of his life, and then as it keeps going and like that big fight happens at Thanksgiving, like the Thanksgiving parade, and like the scene later when Felicia's talking with his sister, like you start to realize that she's also putting on an act, and she's also like hiding stuff and like putting on a performance, and like she's like you know, like she's not going it, like she's not as like one dimensional as we think, or like she's not like just merely servicing. And like Carey Mulligan really does like capture that.
Absolutely. The movie is I mean, we've seen so many movies in the past about the loneliness of genius. That is a common theme in films about great people, quote unquote great people, is about how lonely it can be to be at the top. And with this, we definitely see Leonard Bernstein's loneliness. But primarily, the film's not about that. It's instead about the loneliness that artists and that geniuses inflict on those that love them. Because she didn't necessarily choose that life of loneliness, which, I mean, she did choose that life of loneliness, but that's what the film's about, is her making that choice to be with Leonard, to stick by his side, even though we see it's kind of making her absolutely miserable. And her performance, like you were saying, Akshat, it's so layered and complex, and that facade that she's putting on, it's the same as Bradley Cooper. She is pretending to be someone that she's not. She's hiding that sadness. She's an actor in her career, and she's an actor in her personal life. And it's Carey Mulligan's the perfect casting for this, I think. She has such a posh, but also kind of there's an innocence to her that's been there ever since she first appeared in the scene in Education back in 2009. She always has this sort of sweetness, this sort of softness, and that really, really is an asset for her here, because that innocence, it's painful to watch her hurt.
I feel that. I'm probably alone in that feeling, like when we talk about for our Holdovers episode, and I'm sure that we'll talk about for our Killers of the Flower Moon episode. It's just, I understand these are great performances. They just leave me wanting a little bit more. Speaking of wanting a little bit more, that's still how I feel about this script after a second viewing, even if I like the film overall. A step up. I get the point of it, what you just talked about there, where it's her story, it's the loneliness of the famed creative, but I also feel disconnected. Maybe that is the angle they're going for, is so that you feel more in Felicia's shoes. But throughout the whole time, I'm like, we kind of rush through their initial falling in love romance. We have the time jump. You kind of have to get reoriented with the story at that point, because a lot has happened and they don't really give you all that information up front. I feel like you say this film is the anti-Wikipedia film, but at the same time, I feel like knowing the Wikipedia helps fill in some of these beats throughout the film. And as someone who personally does not know the most about Leonard Bernstein outside of his biggest works, I was left a little bit astray on the first viewing and still here on the second. I think when the film gets more into smaller moments, like the scene on the bench I talked about before, or the Snoopy scene during Thanksgiving, I think that's when the script is shining its brightest, as well as, I guess, the way it weaves in those few musical moments where we see Bernstein conducting or we see Felicia acting. But I think the way it gets from point to point is a little bit shaky. I think that's where some of my issues with the pacing and with the script kind of fall.
So I did have that issue largely in like when I saw it for the first time, and I'm not going to say that like it totally went away the second time, but what I did notice with the screenplay this time specifically was like the way it's structured. It like kind of felt like stuff was skipped, yeah, but like there would be like important tidbits and like what seemed like innocuous or random scenes and random placements that would kind of tell you like what the character was thinking and how they've evolved like since the time has progressed. And then I read in a review somewhere, I wish I remembered which one, because I would have like wanted to cite it, but like they kind of talked about how like the script kind of like takes place or puts scenes that are taking place in between like major moments, and like maybe in between like revealing or bursts revealing, and or like between like the fight and stuff like that, and it's kind of like showing like characters reacting to that and seeing how it's affecting them. And if we're talking about a movie that like is depicting the kind of impact that Bernstein's life has had on not only him but his family and like Felicia, like that's kind of like a really effective way of doing it, because like you're seeing them like react to the fallout or thinking differently or like, you know, like changing stuff based on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have pros and cons for the screenplay. Now, the argument I would have for nominating it, not just it being unconventional in structure, the dialogue is so fun. It's so stylish, and I've read a lot of people roasting it online. It's worthy of being roasted. It's so dumb.
The vestibule.
But like even just any scene where they're talking in the park, you know, what number are you thinking about now? Ooh, I just couldn't possibly guess. Well, you must guess. You must guess. Well, could it be 7? Oh, wrong, darling. Think higher. Think higher. Like, it's just that back and forth, the quippiness back and forth is ridiculous. But I'll ask you this: even though it might be ridiculous, does it ever feel unbelievable. Like, does this not feel like the way these people speak? To write dialogue like that, that's so stylized and so unlike any of us would ever speak, and to make it sound natural to how those characters would speak, that is definitely an accomplishment. And this is some of my favorite stylized dialogue. It might be pointless, it might go nowhere, but I love the sound of it. I love listening to it. So that's a big pro on the script for me. But I'd say the major con is that a lot of those scenes just do kind of feel pointless. That's definitely why, the movie never drags for me. I don't find it to be slow or boring, but there are definitely moments where I'm thinking, we get the point, this is an unconventional biopic, but, like, what are we doing with this? Like, what's this moment? So that's my big con, but I do think the movie deserves a little bit more credit for how ridiculous that dialogue is and how it works regardless.
Watching this at home, watching it in a movie theater, both times I felt very immersed into the setting. It's not always banging you over the head with the most loud noises. I think sometimes in the quiet moments it really works too, but when you are in those musical like settings, whether it's either the fake musical that they're watching in front of them, the cathedral scene later on, or even just random moments throughout the film, the sound just burst in. It's so loud, it feels like you're shaking. Even when you're at home, like, I don't have big surround sound speakers, and I could still feel the impact of when the audio wants you to feel impact. And I think, again, putting your objectiveness of this movie aside, if you don't like Maestro, you have to at least admit its texts are still marvelous.
Yeah, the sound is definitely, I mean, when we had Lucas on to talk Zone of Interest, he made a point of talking about music in movies in our little, like, game video. That, it's so hard to evaluate what a movie is doing well with the sound design when the music is so much of it. But the music here is the sound, and the way that it shapes the music makes you feel the impact, and, you hear the music sing in you. Does the music sing? It sings. It absolutely sings. Yeah, it gives such weight to the music no matter what it is. That said, I will give one moment that I noticed that was like, that is so unsubtle, and it's when he's driving in the car and he's old and they're listening to We Didn't Start the Fire.
Yeah,
and
I noticed that
you
this
can
time.
you can hear that they turned up the volume for when it goes Leonard Bernstein.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like you could, like, I mean, it does help that Leonard Bernstein, like, created some banger tracks, but, like, I mean, but, like, yeah, I mean, like, the music was used really well. I mean, obviously, like, the standout is the cathedral scene, and there were also small things that I noticed, like, like that interview, like, I keep coming back to the interview, because, like, it was one of those, like, scenes that weirdly stood out to me, and, like, I really liked how, like, when they changed perspective, like, from, like, watching it on the TV to, like, seeing it directly, like, perspective of the sound changed as well. So it was just, like, little things that, like, it showed that they took a lot of, like, they took care of a lot of attention to detail.
Yeah, the attention to detail is just so magnificent in that sound design, and I gotta also say the attention to detail in the cinematography, the way the light, it just, in every scene, there's such subtle details with the lighting, and the camera movement is not subtle at all. It's very clear what it's doing, but some of those moments very early on in the film where the camera will sweep through a wall, or one of my favorite moments is when the two of them run from that place, and I think it's in Boston, and they're like, well, why can't we leave right now? And they run, and the camera tracks above them, and then suddenly they're in a theater. Oh, that's cinema. Right there. It's so gorgeous. I'm such a style over substance guy, I will say. So ultimately, even if I didn't like the screenplay as much as I do, I probably would love the movie anyways, just for how beautifully cinematic the cinematography is, the camera movements, the lighting. It's perfect.
I'll talk about Cooper's direction here in a little bit, but cinematography is my highlight of this film. Even when I wasn't a fan of it, I was still like, yeah, cinematography needs to be in any best cinematography lineup there is. I'm not going to touch on the camera movements as much because you just hit on some of my favorite ones. Instead, I kind of want to talk about how the camera looks throughout the film, because we have the black and white scenes where the aspect ratio is a little bit different. Then we have our time jump. We see color now. It's got that little grain to it. As the film keeps going on, we see what the visuals would look like if we were around in that time. It kind of places us into our time periods where we don't need a little text bubble at the bottom say, oh, it's 1950, 1960, 1970. The camera shows us, hey, we've made a jump. Get on our wavelength. We're not going to take time out to say, hey, we're here now. And I think that was just so impressive. And I think the cinematography choices throughout too also spark some very bold decisions. I go to the cathedral scene and how it's on the gimbal and it keeps moving. I will say my one issue for that is, why do you cut? Why do you cut to the other band members? Just keep moving. Just flow through the scene. Show the band members that way without having to splice and then come back. Because it looks like when we come back, we have moved a little bit. So clearly there is a one take out there. I would like to see what that one take looks like. But there's other times at the film where just the decision where you put the camera is just so good. Like the Snoopy scene again. You just lock it down. You stay wide. We don't need to be up in Bradley Cooper's face seeing him get angry. We don't need to see Carey Mulligan shout. You just put it wide. It makes us feel like we are like spying into this conversation. Leonard Bernstein doesn't want people to know that he's arguing with his wife. So it's just like, I just think it throws you into various parts of the film where clearly you aren't supposed to be there, but because of where the camera's at is allowing you to like peer into their life. And I think that kind of makes it for some of the weaknesses of the screenplay of flowing you into scenes. The cinematography is like, hey, we'll make up for a few lost pages in the script by just putting the camera here, and you gotta just get on our wavelength.
Yeah, there's also like some of like the long takes that like Cooper like uses like. And like on the actors, like the one scene I can think of is like when their friends come and they're doing that like kind of wedding thing, and like before they start the thing, they're like describing like an anecdote or about something, and you can kind of see like the camera just like planted on Carey Mulligan, and you can like kind of just see her like slowly like getting like emotional and like kind of like not being able to keep that like strong facade, and it's just like small things like those, and like. Yeah, and Dyl, you were right. When I saw the black and white, the first thing I saw was, oh wow, that looks like something like in like whenever that like would be like taking place. Like it looked like crazily good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the cinematography not just captures the era in the design, it also captures the style of shooting that would have happened at those times. The 70s stuff, not only does it look in the graininess of it, the way the color comes through, it like literally even the editing choices feel like they are from a 70s film. The placement of the camera feels like it's from a 70s film. You could see that as like elements of The French Connection, The Godfather, they're in there. And the 50s stuff, it feels so 50s. Like I mentioned earlier, On the Waterfront, Marty, all of those 50s films, those Hollywood golden age melodramas, A Streetcar Named Desire. The film feels like it could have been directed by Elia Kazan, and then it switches like midway through and it feels like it could have been directed by William Friedkin. And then I will say it doesn't fully land like a specific style for the 80s. It kind of just feels like more of the same, but definitely the 50s and the 70s, I'm so captivated by the choices that they made to make it feel like it just belongs in that era. So let's talk about the elephant in the room, the nose on the face, makeup and hairstyling, the thing that's so obvious about this movie. It's so noticeable, and I will say I've commended this movie time and time again for not being a typical biopic, for not falling into, the Wikipedia formula. But one thing it absolutely is super baity with is the makeup styling. Like, the makeup here, it's exactly the same as like what we've seen in every other biopic over the years that has like been an Oscar contender, from Darkest Hour to The Iron Lady to Vice to Bombshell. Many of those makeup artist is the same as the one in this movie, but yeah, it really feels like it's trying to be that big grand biopic just in how the makeup is done.
Well, you mentioned how some of those films have the same makeup artists. Kaiser Hiro, who I actually had the pleasure of seeing a Q&A at my screening of Maestro at the Virginia Film Festival, kind of hear a little bit about his process going in. And what his process basically is what you're talking about, to make it as realistic. Maybe that's biopic-y, maybe that's into the generic formula, but he wants to make the actor look as photorealistic to the real person as possible. He goes about by looking at photos, videos, as well as involving any family members or physical connections of whoever they're going about with the modern day. So here with Maestro, he worked with Leonard Bernstein's kids to try to make sure to make Bradley Cooper look as accurate throughout the time periods. And I will admit, I kind of went into this film not really wanting to like the makeup. I, like you, thought like, oh yeah, it's just another generic one, whatever. And during the film, I'm like, it's cool, it's not great, but hearing the Q&A, hearing like the backstory of what goes into it, maybe that's a pro of having more Q&As in front of films, hearing the people involved with the craft speaking about how they came about the craft, that makes you look at it differently when a second viewing, because this time, not just the nose, but his cheeks, his forehead, his face, his neck, how it ages and progresses throughout the film. The little subtle stuff to Carey Mulligan, she doesn't age as much, but then when you have the sudden reveal of her post-diagnosis, it hits so much harder. And I mean, if you look throughout Hiro's other filmography, you have Oscar winners like Bombshell, like The Darkest Hour that you mentioned, but he also does some other stuff. We have Shape of Water, where he had the creature, where he created the creature's concept, and then stuff like Tron Legacy, where it's not just noses, it's not just fat suits. It goes a little bit wider than that. And while Maestro would not be my favorite work of the year, I think the makeup is impressive. And then flipping over to the hairstyle, I think something that we always kind of forget talking about this category. Carey Mulligan has so many inspired and great looking pieces. You can never tell, are those real? Are they a wig? That's something that I don't always notice, but I have been watching a lot of these Best Picture nominees with my grandmother, who always makes sure to comment, hey, those look fake. She didn't say that for my show. She said they look amazing.
Oh, that's good. The hair, yeah, that comes through.
I mean, the aging effects, I will say, like they really, like they kind of like sneak up on you. You're not even like noticing, and then like when Bernstein becomes old, like you see like the neck stuff, and like, you know, the cheeks like enlarging and stuff like that. I do go back and forth on the nose, simply because like I feel like it's a curse to know that there was so much controversy over it. So like on the first watch, I was like kind of seamless, like I didn't notice, but like now, like when I watched it again, I was like, oh, there's the nose, and I'm like, ugh, why do I know this? Like, you know, it's not bad or anything. Like, I think like it's pretty good. Like, and it goes like with the quality of the overall makeup. But like, yeah, that one, and like,
I think you notice it right away, but the film does a good job of easing it in the rest of the way out, where it's not the first thing that you notice in every scene. It looks natural, because I do agree, once you hear the controversy, you're going to be looking for it while watching, and I definitely did my first. I'm like, okay, let's see how this nose looks, and right away, you can clearly tell that's not Bradley Cooper's nose, but as the film goes along, and I think especially in those older sequences, it looks so natural, so seamless. I just think when he's younger, it stands out a little bit, but once you get past the black and white scenes, I think it looks phenomenal.
There's no doubt about that. It is flawlessly done work technically. I would just say, I think this is part of the biopic formula that I don't love, which is it always feels like they're chasing after accolades for being like, look, we represented this person perfectly on screen. And for a movie that's so unconcerned with perfectly representing Bernstein, it does feel a little bit odd that they went so far to be like, let's make it look perfect. And it does feel a little phony Oscar chasing, which is what a lot of people accuse the film of being overall, which I disagree with.
For everything that you just said there, besides when I watched Priscilla this year, the whole time I'm like, Jacob Elordi looks nothing like Elvis, and it kind of took me out of the movie. So like, in theory, I do agree with that sentiment, and maybe it doesn't bother you. It definitely bothered me during that film, so I can't like be contradictory here and be like, oh yeah, I agree, I would want that as well, when I just had another movie that came out in the last 4 months. I'm like, that's not Elvis. How am I supposed to buy into this? Which I know is probably not the right way to go about it. But
that's because you're a Baz Luhrmann enjoyer.
Shill. Baz Luhrmann shill.
Baz Luhrmann shill.
You know what? Baz Luhrmann, he can get nominations in costumes and editing. Maestro, it couldn't, but as we talked about here, Maestro does have some pretty beautiful costumes, and I guess the editing goes with those scene transitions that we talked about in cinematography, where you have to have that edit perfectly to go above the two rooms, or even with the bow between Mulligan and Bradley Cooper that happens pretty early on. I don't have any issues with the editing here. As I mentioned before, most of my issues with this film does come with the script and me just feeling removed from the central characters, but as I mentioned before, maybe that's the point, and I just don't like that that's the point. We'll talk more about that during past lives, but yeah, I think these are very solid stuff but I understand why they did not make the Oscar lineup.
Costume design is definitely fantastic. It's subtle work. It's not out there, but Mark Bridges did it. Mark Bridges is one of the masters of costumes of the last few decades. He did Phantom Thread, which is some of the best work I've ever seen on film. Just magnificent costume work. And you can feel his hand at play here. It's not showy. It's not flashy. There's no big gowns or anything, but everything feels perfect for the era. It feels cool. It feels stylish. It just gives you what the film is doing in general. His tone of the costumes absolutely mimics what the tone of Bradley Cooper's film is. He knew he fully understood what was needed from him in the costume work, which I really appreciate. And to talk about editing a little bit, I just really enjoy the sort of relaxed pace of the film. We don't need to get anywhere fast. Let's just enjoy the moments. And that's partially in the script, but it's also in the edit. There's no need to charge forward into the next thing. Let's just sit here with the characters.
Yeah, I mean, when I initially saw it, and then I saw like those flashy transitions and stuff, I was like, "There's no way." Like, okay, not that there's no way this was missing, but like this has to be like a big contender for editing. And like it, like you mentioned, it's a very deliberate pace, but it's not like slow or it's not like dragging, but it knows exactly what it wants to do. And again, like after watching it a second time, like because I understood the connectivity of it all, like it like worked a lot more for me. But yeah, it was pretty good. But unfortunately, I guess for the Oscars, the movie was too weak for it to actually compete.
Yeah, it's a little weird to me that it didn't get in for editing, because now we only have one sound nominee that's also in the editing category, because Oppenheimer's the only cross between. I thought it might be Killers of the Flower Moon, but that didn't make sound. So I'm a little bit surprised that Maestro didn't make editing just to give us one more sound nominee there.
I think that happened like 3 years ago with Sound of Metal, but yeah, because like when people talk about like sound editing correlation, I've kind of found that like it doesn't really work as well with the nominations in general. It's like more of the wins where it's like because everyone's voting, so they're kind of like seen as similar things.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That it is less of the editors doing and more of the general body being like, we like flashy editing. Ooh, we like loud noises. Yeah.
Well, speaking of flashy stuff, Bradley Cooper's direction in this, I think, is very flashy. I very much feel like this film steps up his technical prowess that we saw in A Star Is Born. I understood his snub for that film. I know the people are like, oh my gosh, he was snubbed. Honestly, as someone who gave Star Is Born like a strong 9 out of 10 would be like my number 2 or 3 movie on that ballot, he would not touch my director lineup in any year. He was just doing fine stuff here, but here I think he goes above and beyond with everything behind the chair. Matt, you talked a little bit before about how he tries to emulate each decade that we see, and I think he just really hones it in. Like I think everything before it goes to color, I just buy so much, and I just love the way the camera moves, where he puts the camera. Once we hit color, I think some of his creative, bold choices kind of take a back seat for more of the romantic or failed romance that we see later on in the film. But I think what Cooper is doing behind the director's chair is very impressive, and I'll be very excited to see where he goes in the future, because this is 2 films now, both revolving around music. Does he stay on this trend, or is it just kind of a coincidence that he did A Star Is Born and then Maestro? I am very excited for whatever he does next, and regardless of my thoughts the first time watching this, my thoughts the second time watching this, I am still a massive fan of Cooper directing and writing movies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, so like even when I was like kind of like low on the movie, like I couldn't help but like admire that he had like such a specific vision for what he wanted to do. And like yeah, and like you mentioned, like the first half especially, like you could like see it was like in your face, like it on there with the transitions and like the camera movements, and like that big musical scene that's like there and stuff like that. I guess it does make sense that that tapers off because it becomes more serious and like the relationship becomes more about like the conflict and like how fraught it is, and compared to like how like fun and exciting like, the initial buildup of it is. But like I was really impressed that like how he was able to bring it all, and I'm not like disappointed that he was snubbed. Like the Oscar lineup would have been my ideal lineup, so like I'm like totally happy. I wouldn't take anyone out from that. But like if he got in, like I probably would have cried at the time. Like I would have been like, "What are you doing? What is this shit?" But like now, I'd be like, "Oh, I can see it. That's a really good nom."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, with The Star Is Born, which I do still feel like is a stronger movie overall due to the script, due to the story.
I agree.
I think Bradley Cooper's direction in that was strong. However, it felt like it was being directed by Bradley Cooper, the actor. And Maestro feels like the birth of Bradley Cooper, the director. There's none of the self-serving, like, I'm an actor behind the camera and I need to make sure the performances can really, like, get the spotlight. You see him wanting to do flashy stuff as a filmmaker, and prove his mettle as a filmmaker rather than wanting to give himself opportunities to shine on camera. I believe I've heard Bradley Cooper say he wants to back off a little bit from acting in films that aren't his. So that's going to be a really interesting thing to see going forward, that I really do think we're going to see more and more bold, risky steps from Bradley Cooper behind the camera, because I think I could honestly see him make like a weird, not a weird art film, but I could see him going pretty out there with an art film at some point. Maestro gets kind of there. But the biggest thing about Bradley Cooper's direction that I want to say is, when asked about the film, Leonard Bernstein's kids said, well, watching Bradley Cooper's Maestro, I didn't learn a lot about my father, Leonard Bernstein, but I learned a whole lot about Bradley Cooper. And that's how I feel about the movie. I feel like we learn so much about who Bradley Cooper is, about his worldview, and some of it's a little uncomfortable, some of it's a little bit off-putting and strange, and it makes me see Bradley Cooper's flaws as a human being in the film. He's representing all of it on screen, and that's the type of art that I love, but it's really revealing, and I love that it's in the movie. It feels like a therapy session with Bradley Cooper, and I love when art feels like that.
That's going to bring us to what I think is one of the most fun parts of this series every year, hearing our guest preferential ballot. So I take it that you've seen all 10 Best Picture nominees?
Yep, I have.
Awesome. So Maestro probably was in your number 10. Does it stay 10, or do you have a new number 10 after rewatching it?
Oh, yeah, no, it's definitely off 10. I do have a number 10. I will give a couple of caveats here. One, I liked most of the movies. Actually, I liked all of them, or to varying degrees. Like 9 and above is an 8, which is like for Best Picture lineup, like that's pretty good. And the second caveat that I'll give is like I'm going to rewatch all of these at a certain point. Like when the movies come back in theaters for that week before the Oscars, I'll probably check them out. And I have a few in mind that I'm like very particular about. And speaking of which, my number 10 is Past Lives, which like this is like this is the one I'm most eager to rewatch, because I can't really say that like there was any like major technical flaw, or like, oh, that's like a easy first movie flaw to point out, or stuff like that. Like it's very, very commonly made. Like I could clearly see what Celine Song was going for, and I really respect it. I just didn't connect with it emotionally as much as I wanted to, and I frankly don't know why. Like, the ingredients are there, and like and people seem to be like really responding to it. Like I know people who like cried personally, so like that's like one that I'm like really eager to watch and like revisit for sure. Moving on, so it's 9 to 6 are basically interchangeable. Like they could like it kind of depends on like what kind of mood I'm in, or maybe when the rewatch happens, things could go up or down, right? So my number 9 is The Holdovers. I don't have anything bad to say about it. It's a really good movie. The performances are excellent. It's good. That's all I have to say, which is fine. I mean,
Like this list so far.
yeah. Okay, moving on to number 8. I think sorry, I don't know what I'm thinking. It's Barbie. This is way better than it had any right to be. Like the world building in this, and like what Greta Gerwig and like what does with that world is like truly like when you think of like a Barbie movie, like when you probably thought of it like 2 years ago before knowing that Greta Gerwig was attached, you probably like thought it was like a blockbuster that like no one would care about, but like she puts like so much like heart and like vision into it and creates such an amazing world, and everything in Barbie Land is like truly like amazing and funny. For me, it's like when it goes outside of that it starts to drag a bit. I haven't watched this since July though, so that's one where the rewatch maybe changes my opinion a bit. Number 7 is American Fiction. I really like this one too. It's incredibly funny. I seem to like the family dynamic more than a lot of people do. I do. There is like sort of mismatch between, like not mismatch, but it's not as cohesive as maybe it could have been. The connective tissue between like the satire of it all and the family stuff, but I enjoyed it for most of like what it is, and it was pretty good. Number 6 is Maestro. Like this was 10 like as of yesterday. Then I saw it and like big jump. So like a lot of these can move, but I really did grow like an appreciation for it that I did not expect to have, and like it was like. I'm still thinking about it, which is weird. I did not expect this at all. Okay, moving on to number 5. So now this is 9 and above. Poor Things. I will say this is probably my favorite theatrical experience, because I saw this at the New York premiere, and like the kind of like applause and uproar that there was for the crew that was there was something that I haven't come even close to experiencing like ever since, and this is really like a truly magical movie. My issue is mainly like I do think it drags a bit in certain sequences in the middle, and that like keeps it from me like fully giving it a 10. I have also heard that like people who felt that way after the first watch, like that smoothed out a bit on the second watch, so maybe that's something that like benefits, but it really is a good movie, and it's certainly very unique. Number 4 is Killers of the Flower Moon. I do get like the criticism that this receives when it comes to the the perspective of it and all, and maybe Gladstone maybe should have had a bigger role. But I also get like if Martin Scorsese is gonna make this kind of movie, he's most likely gonna base it around like the villains, and it feels very natural to that sensibility. And it's also not like a classic Scorsese movie, right? Like I saw Goodfellas for the first time like 3 or 4 weeks ago, and like that was also like revolving around like really bad people like gangsters. But and it makes sense for the movie because like even at the end the characters like kind of like looking back at it with like a certain kind of nostalgia. But like it's very like stylized and like very glamorous, to say the world is very glamorous. But like here he kind of like strips all that back, and he kind of like represents the mundanity of it and the sometimes straight up idiocy of it. And it is a very tough watch, but I had a very great appreciation of it by the end. Number 3 is Anatomy of a Fall. I do get the issue with the courtroom, like the case itself may not be like that convincing, especially because like Justin Trier did mention that she told Sandra Hüller to play that character as if she was innocent. So that might have like come across in the performance. But the thing I really enjoyed about it was how farcical it was. Like the case was messy, the court proceedings were messy. Like I would be kind of shocked if that's actually how French courts worked. But like that farcical nature of that entire proceeding in that case, kind of makes us the jury of what is going on, and like kind of puts the decision on us to kind of think of how we see this character through that lens, and like and how we judge it. So it was a really like a very engrossing experience throughout. I wouldn't say I thought about it as much, maybe dropped it down a bit, but I mean I still like very much enjoyed it. It's like top 3 of the year. Number 2 is Oppenheimer. The JFK line, I don't know why that's there. Terrible line, but like what, and I get it. And some of the criticisms I genuinely get. Like I'm not gonna sit here and say, oh, it's a perfect movie, but like it's such a visceral experience that like I sat through. And, like I just like love that we were able to get like it's not even like we got to know Oppenheimer the person like full detail, but just to be in his mindset and to kind of see the journey. As for like the first 2 hours, it's kind of like built up as an action movie to like, oh, they're all gonna like come together to save the world and beat the Nazis, and then when you like by the time hour 2 ends and like the bomb is built, it's successful and it's used in Japan, like the fallout that follows, it's like the other shoe drops, and it's like you're just like kind of you're in his mind and you're thinking about it and you're like witnessing what that is, and I wouldn't say like it fully clicked for me on first watch. I did give it a very high score, but like I was unsure like how much I wanted it. Like some things maybe didn't fit, and like I didn't know if I wanted to watch it again. I ended up watching it like 3 days later because I couldn't stop thinking about it. So it kind of had that effect on me. And in most years, it would be my number 1 if the zone of interest did not exist, which is my number 1. I mean, like you mentioned and like Jonathan Glazer said, this movie isn't really about like, showing the life like that Nazis are bad or the banality of evil. It's about like people who seem normal, who have goals that seem normal. Like this is like if you think about it, this movie is about a family who are like the head of the family, like he's like at his job, like providing for his kids, then suffers a setback when he's like transferred somewhere, and then he works his way back to get a promotion, and like the movie ends with his biggest triumph. It just happens to be that he's an officer for the Nazi government. So like that kind of like concept is like very like it's very like interesting to think about, and like obviously like sound design adds a ton to it, and like whoa, this is making me feel things that I did not expect. And by the end, like when you're sitting through the credits, like that music that's playing, I would rewatch it for that alone. Like you're just sitting there numb, like to what you just watched, and you're just like kind of like soaking it all in. And I think that's like kind of like singular experience that you wouldn't get a lot.
That's a great list. Any list with Zone at number 1, I'm like, yeah, that's cool. That's really cool.
That's our first list with Zone at number 1. I'm surprised it took us this many episodes to get in, but that is going to reach us the conclusion of this episode revisiting Maestro in our 2024 Best Picture Revisiting series. As always, if you made it this far in the video, please consider dropping a like, a comment, a subscription. Keeps you updated when we have our next one coming out in just a few days. But until then, my name's Dyl.
My name is Matt, and thank you so much, Akshat, for joining us today and talking Maestro. It's been a pleasure having you here.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed it too.
And this has been Fantasy Filmball.